Laughter echoed off cold walls of the grand auction hall as a broken chestnut stallion lies motionless, discarded and forgotten, when a young rancher, burdened by his own invisible scars, raises his hand to bid. Mockery swells. But neither he nor the horse is finished yet. This is an incredible story of belief, trust, and a bond that will heal all wounds. The air inside the auction house was thick with the scent of dust and sweat, mingling with the pungent sharpness of hay long past. Its prime, voices rippled through the cavernous hall, a blend of casual conversation and sharp bursts of cruel laughter that echoed from the rafters. Men in worn jackets and sun-faded hats leaned against the rails, eyes narrowed with the cold detachment of those who'd seen too much and learned to care too little. In the center of it all, beneath the sterile blaze of artificial lights, lay the reason for their scorn. The stallion's ribs rose in shallow, uneven breaths, every movement whispering of exhaustion and defeat. His once glossy chestnut coat was dulled with dirt and neglect, patches of raw skin hidden beneath matted tangles of his unkempt mane. His eyes, when they dared to open, were void of fight, hollow pools reflecting nothing but resignation. The auctioneer's voice barely cut through the haze of ridicule, strained with the effort of selling what no one wanted. "Lot 47, a thoroughbred stallion," the auctioneer called out, though the words carried no conviction. "Prime racing, bloodline. Starting bid at $50. Silence. The crowd shifted, a ripple of disdainful amusement passing through them like the wind before a storm. Somewhere, a man coughed, and someone else muttered, "Might as well sell him for glue." The stallion didn't react. He didn't flinch. His spirit had long since been bled dry by hands that didn't know kindness. And then, in the thick of that cruel stillness, Henry raised his hand. He wasn't much to look at, barely older than a boy, with dark hair curling messily around his ears and calloused hands that bore the stories of hard, thankless work. His worn denim jacket hung off his narrow frame, and his boots were scuffed from long walks along back roads with nowhere in particular to go. The auctioneer blinked at him, unsure if he was seeing clearly. $50. Do I hear 75? Another. Silence. But this one was different, tinged with confusion, laced with derision. A snicker broke from the crowd. "You serious, boy? What are you going to do with that bag of bones?" Henry swallowed hard, his pulse thundering in his ears. His hand didn't waver. The laughter grew louder, sharp and cutting, but it didn't matter. His eyes were locked on the stallion. Something, he didn't know what, called to him. Maybe it was the shared weight of brokenness, the way the horse's stillness echoed the heaviness that had buried itself deep inside Henry's own chest, where old grief and bitter regret had settled like stones. He didn't see a ruined animal lying in the dirt. He saw a survivor. No other bids. "Sold to the boy for $50, the auctioneer announced, his voice thick with disbelief. Henry's legs felt like lead as he made his way toward the ring. Every step was chased by murmurs of mockery, pity, wrapped in derision, but he didn't stop. As he drew closer, the reality of what he'd done settled over him. The horse was worse off than he'd thought, closer to the edge than anyone had realized. He knelt slowly, careful not to spook the stallion, though he doubted the horse had any energy left for fear. Up close, the animal's gauntness was even more striking. Every rib showed, each sharp edge of bone, a testament to months, maybe years of neglect. "Hey, buddy," Henry whispered, voice catching on the unfamiliar tenderness. "You're safe now, I promise." The stallion's ear twitched, just barely. A flicker of life. That was all Henry needed. They called him a fool as he led the horse out of the auction yard, guiding him with a fraying rope halter. Majesty, that's what Henry decided to name him, though the irony didn't escape him. There was no majesty in the hollow creature stumbling weakly beside him. Not yet. The journey home was slow, the afternoon sun bearing down like judgment itself. Henry's small plot of land sat on the outskirts of town, forgotten by most, an old, weather-worn cabin surrounded by fields that once belonged to his father. Now, it was just him and silence, the same silence that had haunted him since the accident 2 years ago. The day his brother died. Gravel crunched underfoot as he led Majesty to the battered old stable at the back of the property. It wasn't much, barely standing, patched together with more stubbornness than skill. But it would be shelter. Carefully, Henry eased the horse into the small space, spreading fresh straw across the ground with deliberate gentleness. Majesty collapsed onto the bedding without protest, his sides shivering with exhaustion. Henry watched him for a long moment, heart aching with a kind of rawness he hadn't let himself feel in years. "I know what it's like," he murmured, "to feel like there's nothing left." The horse didn't respond. He didn't have to. That night, sleep came fitfully. Henry sat by the stall with a blanket draped over his shoulders, the cold biting through the thin fabric. Every time Majesty's breathing hitched or trembled in his sleep, Henry reached out, offering a hand, offering presence. Neither of them had anyone else. Morning broke soft and grey, light filtering through thick clouds that threatened rain. Henry's bones ached as he rose, exhaustion tangled deep in his muscles. Yet when he looked into the stable and saw Majesty still breathing, still alive, a flicker of stubborn hope ignited in his chest. That was when Samuel appeared. The old rancher leaned against the gate, arms crossed, with sharp eyes that missed. Nothing. His lined face was the map of a life spent under sun and sky, hardened by loss and carved by time. "You're in over your head, boy." Henry turned, jaw tight. "I didn't ask for your opinion." Samuel chuckled, a sound like gravel sliding down a hill. "Didn't need to. You don't just save a horse like that, not without knowing what broke him in the first place." Henry bristled, the words cutting close to something raw inside him. "I'll figure it out." But Samuel didn't leave. Instead, he studied the stallion's broken frame, his expression softening into something like respect. "You've got guts, I'll give you that, and stupidity. But maybe that's what this horse needs." Henry stared at Majesty, the weight of responsibility settling heavy on his shoulders. I can't let him give up." Samuel nodded, slowly. "Neither can you." In that fragile moment, a quiet understanding passed between them. The journey ahead would be brutal, more than Henry could imagine, but giving up wasn't an option, not for him, and not for Majesty. The days that followed were carved from grit and quiet desperation. Each morning began before the sun had clawed its way above the horizon. Henry would rise from his creaking bed, his breath misting in the cold, dawn air, and make his way to the stable. The smell of damp earth and straw clung to everything, a constant reminder of how raw and real this challenge was. Every step toward Majesty felt like stepping into battle, against doubt, exhaustion, and the gnawing fear that maybe the crowd had been right. But every morning, Majesty was still breathing. At first, that was enough. The stallion's body was still frail. Each movement was laboured, like dragging a shipwreck ashore. His eyes remained dull, unfocused, like a window clouded by grime. Henry worked with a tenderness born from deep respect, speaking in soft murmurs as he brought buckets of water and small portions of soaked oats and fresh hay. The goal wasn't to feed him strength all at once. That would be cruel. Majesty's body had to remember what nourishment felt like, piece by piece. "Just a little today," Henry whispered one morning, offering the horse a small handful of oats mixed with apple slices. His voice broke the silence like the first ripple on a still lake. Majesty's ears twitched weakly, barely perceptible, but to Henry, it was everything. "That's it. You're stronger than you think." The routine became sacred. Henry's hands worked tirelessly, brushing Majesty's coat with slow, deliberate strokes to ease out the knots and grime of neglect. Every time his hand passed over a fresh scar hidden beneath matted fur, guilt surged, through him, a sharp reminder that someone else's cruelty had made this necessary. His jaw would tighten as he bit back frustration at whoever had done this, channeling it instead into care. Yet progress was painfully slow. The worst days were the ones when Majesty wouldn't move at all, when even lifting his head seemed like a burden too great to bear. Henry would sit in the straw next to him, back pressed to the stall wall, reading aloud from worn books or simply talking about nothing in particular. Sometimes, in the thick silence, Henry spoke of his brother. "I wasn't there when it happened," he confessed one evening, voice barely a whisper as dusk bled into night. The lantern's soft glow flickered across Majesty's frail frame. "We fought before he left. Stupid stuff. I told him to stay off the bike until he fixed the brakes, but he didn't listen. And I didn't stop him. I should have stopped him." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Majesty didn't move, but Henry swore the horse's breathing, steadied, just enough to let him continue. "I keep thinking, maybe if I'd just tried harder, he'd still be here." That confession felt like pulling glass from his chest, raw and jagged, but necessary. It was Samuel who broke the stagnation. The old rancher returned on the third week, leaning against the fence with his arms folded and sharp eyes studying the stallion's slow progress. Majesty had managed to stay on his feet longer now, though every step remained a struggle. "You're feeding him right," Samuel said gruffly. "But that ain't enough. This isn't just about getting his body strong. You gotta fix his mind, too." Henry frowned. "How do you fix something that's been broken for so long?" Samuel's eyes softened with the weight of unspoken memories. "You don't fix it. You help him remember what it feels like to trust again. And that starts with small steps." So began a new kind of work, a focus on rebuilding Majesty's spirit, not just his body. The first challenge was getting Majesty to move willingly. Henry started small, leading him around the stable yard on a loose rope. The first attempt was met with stubborn resistance. The stallion froze, his muscles locking like steel cables. Henry didn't push. Instead, he stood beside him, hand resting gently against the horse's neck, offering patience instead of force. "Whenever you're ready," Henry murmured. An hour passed, then two. Finally, with the sun dipping low and casting long shadows across the ground, Majesty shifted one hoof forward. It was a small step, a fraction of movement, but it was his choice. "Good," Henry whispered, voice thick with emotion. "That's good, Majesty." Each day built on the last. One step became two, and soon, Majesty was walking short distances, across the yard, his muscles beginning to remember strength. The weight of trauma was still there. Every sudden sound sent ripples of tension through his body. But those moments became less frequent as time wore on. It wasn't easy. Some days, Majesty retreated inward, refusing to engage. The old fear would return, curling through his body like smoke. On those days, Henry didn't push. Instead, he sat beside him, offering quiet companionship without expectation. "Some days are harder," Henry would say, voice low and steady. "That's okay. You're not alone anymore." The first real breakthrough came unexpectedly. It was early morning, cool, with fog curling low over the fields like ghostly waves. Henry led Majesty into the yard as usual, but something shifted. As Henry loosened the rope to let the stallion walk freely, Majesty didn't just move, he followed. No hesitation, no force, just a quiet decision to trust. Henry turned slowly, careful not to break the fragile moment. "You're following me, huh?" Majesty's ears flicked forward, eyes clearer than Henry had ever seen them. That moment broke something inside Henry. Not pain, but something closer to hope. A fragile, precious thing that felt dangerous to hold. The weeks bled into months, and the bond between man and horse grew stronger with each passing day. Majesty's body thickened with muscle, his coat beginning to regain the glossy sheen it once had. There was power in his steps now, a grace that hinted at what he could become. But healing wasn't a straight path. One crisp autumn afternoon, Samuel suggested introducing Majesty to the training ring, a large, open space with room to run. The idea was simple. Let Majesty feel his own strength again. Henry hesitated, fear gnawing at him. What if it's too soon? Samuel's expression was firm but kind. You'll never know until you let him try. So Henry led Majesty into the ring, unhooking the rope and stepping back. The stallion stood still, eyes scanning the space, tension rippling under his coat. Go on, buddy, Henry encouraged softly. You're free. Run if you want to. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then Majesty shifted, slow at first, a tentative step forward, then another. His muscles coiled with remembered instinct, and suddenly, he ran. It wasn't graceful, not yet. His strides were uneven, heavy with the memory of weakness. But the sound of hooves hitting packed earth was thunderous, raw and powerful, echoing through the crisp air. Henry watched, breath caught in his throat, as Majesty raced the wind. No ropes, no fear, just pure, unfiltered freedom. For the first time since the auction, Majesty looked alive. Samuel's voice was low with approval. There's still fight in him. Henry swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. Yeah, he whispered, and maybe in me too. That night, Henry sat by the stable, staring up at the stars scattered across the velvet sky. Majesty rested beside him, breathing slow and steady. You're not the only one who needed saving, Henry murmured, voice thick with emotion. I thought I was too broken to fix anything. But maybe we're fixing each other. The wind stirred the grass in gentle waves, carrying the scent of earth and rain. For the first time in what felt like forever, Henry didn't feel alone. The days grew shorter as autumn deepened, and the air sharpened with the bite of the coming winter. Mornings arrived draped in mist, frost dusting the brittle grass like silver threads, and the world seemed to hush beneath the chill. But on Henry's little stretch of land, something rare was beginning to stir, a sense of hope, fragile but persistent, like the first green shoots daring to rise through thawing soil. Majesty was transforming before Henry's eyes. His coat now gleamed with a rich burnished chestnut sheen, every movement rippling with newfound strength. The hollow spaces beneath his eyes had softened, and the haunted emptiness in his gaze had begun to fade. The horse that had once been a trembling shadow now stood tall with quiet dignity, each hooffall landing with confidence rather than fear. Henry watched this transformation with a deep, quiet awe that tangled with his own awakening. His days were no longer defined by the weight of regret or the shadows of grief. His hands moved with purpose, feeding, grooming, training, a steady rhythm that anchored him when memories threatened to drag him under. But it wasn't just Majesty who had changed. Each morning, Henry found himself rising with something close to determination rather than dread. The weight of his brother's death hadn't disappeared. Grief, he realized, was never something you simply left behind. But it no longer crushed him beneath its heel. There was space now. Space for healing. Space for redemption. One afternoon, Samuel returned, leaning against the fence with the familiarity of an old ghost. Looks like you've worked some miracles here, Samuel said, nodding toward Majesty as the stallion trotted along the perimeter of the field with effortless grace. It's not a miracle, Henry replied, brushing sweat from his brow. It's trust. Samuel gave a low grunt of approval, the corner of his mouth twitching in something that almost resembled a smile. That trust is going to be tested soon. Henry looked up, tension coiling in his chest. What do you mean? Samuel crossed his arms, his gaze fixed on Majesty with something like reverence. You've brought him back from the edge, but there's one last mountain to climb. You need to get him back on the track. Henry's breath caught. The idea of racing again felt absurd. A betrayal of the fragile peace they had built together. He's not ready for that, Henry said sharply. Racing's what broke him in the first place. Samuel didn't flinch. And facing what broke you is how you heal. The words landed like a stone in Henry's stomach. he looked back, at Majesty, who had slowed his trot, standing tall with his ears pricked forward, watching them with calm curiosity. Could he ask this of him? Was it fair to bring him back to the very thing that had nearly destroyed him? But deep down, Henry knew Samuel was right. Healing wasn't just about comfort, it was about reclaiming power. Majesty had been robbed of his choice before. Now, it was time to give it back. Training for the track was different, more intense, more demanding. But Henry approached it with patience and understanding. There were no forceful commands, no harsh discipline, just encouragement and gentle persistence. The first time they brought Majesty near the old training track, Henry could feel the tension flood the stallion's body like a storm surge. His muscles coiled, eyes wide with old fear, hooves skittering nervously against the packed earth. Henry didn't push him forward. Instead, he stood by Majesty's side, hand resting against his strong neck. "You're safe," Henry whispered, his voice steady and sure. "You don't have to run, not until you're ready." It took hours for Majesty to take a step onto the track. A small, trembling movement, but it was his choice. The next day, they did it again. And the day after, that, step by step, Majesty reclaimed the ground that had once been soaked with fear. There were setbacks too. One morning, as they approached the track, a sudden burst of wind rattled the nearby fence. Majesty's body locked up, eyes wild with panic, as old instincts took over. His breath came hard and fast, sides trembling violently. Henry didn't try to soothe him with empty words. Instead, he stood there in silence, simply being present, grounding Majesty with his steady hand and calm, breathing. "It's okay," Henry said softly after a long moment. "You're not back there. You're here, with me." Gradually, the panic ebbed. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, Majesty began to run again. At first, his strides were hesitant, clumsy and uneven, as if every step was weighed down by old memories. But Henry ran beside him, matching his pace, pushing his own body past exhaustion, just to show Majesty that he wasn't alone in this fight. Each time Majesty ran, the fear loosened its grip. His muscles grew stronger, his confidence returned. There were moments, fleeting, like the sharp burst of wind through trees, where Majesty ran not from fear, but with freedom. It was Samuel who suggested entering the local charity race. "It's not about winning," Samuel said one evening, leaning against the stable door. "It's about showing him he can face the world again, and showing yourself the same thing." The thought of returning Majesty to a race, any race, filled Henry with equal parts terror and hope. But when he looked into Majesty's eyes, clear and bright, with something that looked like fire, he knew they were ready. The day of the race arrived under a sky split with pale morning light, the horizon painted in soft golds and blues. The local racetrack was a modest venue, surrounded by rolling fields and a scattering of eager spectators. It wasn't the grand stadiums of Majesty's past, but it didn't need to be. As Henry led Majesty toward the starting line, the world around him seemed to fade. Every heartbeat thudded like a drum in his chest, every breath sharp and deliberate. His hands trembled as he tightened the reins, but Majesty didn't falter. The stallion walked with quiet grace, every step radiating strength and resolve. The other competitors eyed them with curiosity, some with recognition, others with thinly veiled doubt. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is that—" No, it couldn't be. But Henry didn't care. His focus was on Majesty. "We're not here for them," he murmured. "Just you and me. We've already won by standing here." The gunshot echoed through the air like thunder. At first, Majesty didn't move. The other horses surged forward in a blur of muscle and power. But Henry didn't push, didn't panic. He simply whispered, "You're free. Run when you're ready." A heartbeat passed. Then Majesty moved. At first, his strides were cautious, measured, but then something clicked. His body remembered what it was to fly. His muscles stretched with grace and power, hooves pounding the earth like the beat of a war drum. The crowd's cheers became a distant roar as Majesty surged forward, closing the distance with breathtaking speed. Every stride was a reclamation, a defiance of everything that had once tried to break him. Henry leaned forward, tears stinging his eyes. "That's it, Majesty. You're doing it." They didn't win the race. They didn't need to. As Majesty crossed the finish line, Henry pulled him to a gentle stop, wrapping his arms around the stallion's powerful neck. The crowd's cheers swelled, not for victory, but for something far greater: redemption. That night, back at the stable, Henry rested his forehead against Majesty's warm shoulder. The stallion stood steady and proud, breathing slow and even. "You did it," Henry whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You came back." The stars shimmered above them in silent approval, the sky vast and endless. In that moment, Henry realized it wasn't just Majesty who had been saved. They had saved each other. The days after the race unfolded in quiet celebration, not the roaring kind that echoed from grandstands or crowded streets, but the kind that lingered in soft moments and gentle reminders of how far they had both come. Henry spent hours brushing Majesty's coat until it gleamed like polished copper beneath the afternoon sun. The stallion stood tall and proud now, no longer the broken creature that had been dragged onto the auction floor, ribs like a prison of suffering. His eyes were bright, alive with something fierce and beautiful, a testament to the journey they had carved out of pain and persistence. The race hadn't been about glory, but about proving something far more profound, that neither of them was, defined by the weight of their past. The days were easier now. Henry no longer woke with the crushing heaviness that had once pinned him beneath layers of regret. The guilt that had wrapped around his chest, suffocating and relentless, had eased, not gone, but softened, like an old scar that no longer hurt when touched. His brother's memory still followed him, but it didn't haunt him. Instead, it lived inside him, a quiet reminder of love lost and the lessons left behind. One evening, as the sky melted into hues of lavender and soft amber, Samuel appeared, at the edge of the field, leaning against the fence as he always did. His eyes, sharp and knowing, held the warmth of quiet pride. "You did good, Henry," Samuel said, voice low and rough from years of dust and wind. "Both of you did." Henry approached slowly, brushing dirt off his hands. "I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me the way when I couldn't see it myself." Samuel shook his head, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his weathered face. "You found your own way, son. I just gave you the map. You did all the hard walking." There was a long silence between them, filled with the symphony of the countryside, the rustle of wind through the grass, the distant call of an owl stirring for the night, the gentle rhythm of Majesty's breathing as he grazed nearby. Samuel's gaze drifted to the horse, and something deeper, more reflective, settled into his features. "You know, there's something special about a bond like this. It's not just about training or saving. It's about trust, mutual respect. You gave him a reason to live again, and in doing that, you gave yourself one too." The words hit Henry harder than he expected, because it was true. Weeks turned into months, and life found a new rhythm. Majesty continued to grow stronger, faster, more assured with every passing day. He wasn't the same horse that had collapsed on the straw-covered floor of that auction hall. Now, he ran with the wind, powerful and graceful, every muscle rippling with reclaimed strength. And Henry wasn't the same man either. The shadows of his brother's death no longer clung to him like chains. The grief remained. Grief always did, but it had become a quiet companion instead of a cruel master. Now, when Henry stood in the fields watching Majesty run, it wasn't regret that filled his chest. It was pride. And perhaps for the first time in years, peace. One morning, as the frost began to lift with the first whispers of spring, Henry stood by the fence watching the sun spill over the hills. Majesty galloped across the field, hooves striking the earth like thunder. Every movement was poetry, every breath a reminder of resilience and healing. Samuel approached quietly, carrying a small, worn envelope in his hands. "This came for you," Samuel said, handing it over. Henry turned it over in his hands, recognizing the mark of the local racing board. His heart skipped a beat. He opened the letter slowly, eyes scanning the neatly typed words. They had received an invitation. It wasn't for a grand competition, nor for some high-stakes race. It was something simpler, an honorary showcase, celebrating recovery and resilience, featuring horses who had overcome adversity, a chance for Majesty to run freely before a crowd, not for victory, but for the sheer, undeniable joy of running. Henry felt the weight of the invitation settle in his chest, but this time, it wasn't fear that followed. It was clarity. "It's not about proving anything anymore," Henry murmured, staring out at Majesty. "It's just for him. For us." Samuel nodded, his voice rough with approval. "That's the best kind of race." The day of the showcase arrived under a sky, painted in soft hues of pale blue and gold. The track was simple, bordered by white wooden rails, and surrounded by a gathering of people who had come not for competition, but for inspiration. Henry stood by Majesty's side, his hand resting on the stallion's strong neck. The crowd was a blur in the background, their voices a distant hum. It wasn't about them. It never had been. "Ready, buddy?" Henry whispered. Majesty didn't need reins or encouragement. He knew. The gate opened, and Majesty surged forward, not with the desperate, panicked energy of a horse running from pain, but with the pure, wild grace of freedom reclaimed. His hooves struck the ground in powerful rhythmic beats that echoed through the track. Every muscle stretched and coiled with effortless strength, his mane streaming like fire against the wind. The crowd fell silent, watching in awe as Majesty ran, not as a broken horse, but as a survivor, as a being of power and beauty that had reclaimed his spirit from the jaws of despair. Henry stood at the edge of the track, breath caught in his throat, heart full to bursting. This was the victory. The weeks after the showcase were filled with a quiet kind of joy. Henry expanded his small ranch, transforming it into a sanctuary for horses in need, a place where broken creatures could find refuge, just as Majesty had. Word spread, and soon people from nearby towns came with their own stories of loss and hope, looking for healing. Samuel stayed close, becoming more than a mentor. He was family now, woven into the fabric of Henry's life in ways neither had expected. Majesty remained at the heart of it all. His presence was a reminder of what patience, love, and trust could rebuild. Each morning, as the sun broke over the hills, Henry would watch him run, free, powerful, and alive. One evening, as Henry sat on the porch with Samuel, watching the sun dip behind the horizon, he spoke the words he had once been afraid to say. "I think my brother would have liked it here." Samuel didn't respond right away. Instead, he rested a weathered hand on Henry's shoulder. "I think he'd be proud of the man you've become." The wind whispered through the fields, carrying the scent of earth and wildflowers. Henry closed his eyes, letting the peace of the moment settle over him. He no longer carried the unbearable weight of the past alone. The scars were still there, but they had become part of his story, a story not of failure, but of resilience, healing, and redemption. One morning, as dawn painted the sky with strokes of gold and crimson, Henry stood in the fields, watching Majesty graze peacefully beneath the endless sky. The horse's coat shimmered under the early sun, every movement fluid with grace. Henry placed a hand on Majesty's neck, feeling the warmth beneath his palm. "We made it," he whispered. Majesty's ear flicked toward him, and for a moment, it felt like understanding passed between them, silent, profound, and complete. In that vast stretch of land, surrounded by the echoes of laughter, hoofbeats, and the steady heartbeat of the earth itself, Henry knew the truth. They had both been broken. But in finding each other, they had learned the most important lesson of all. They were never beyond saving. And at last, they were free. If you enjoyed this story, please leave your comment below and don't forget to like, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where your support means the world to us. We look forward to bringing you more content that inspires growth, joy and purpose. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow for another special story.